Ramadi 2004, a name most people have never heard, and yet for the Marines who fought there, it became a name they would never forget. While headlines across the world focused on the chaos unfolding in Fallujah, another brutal battle was erupting just 30 miles to the west. A battle just as intense, just as deadly, but nearly invisible to the outside world. This was the first Battle of Ramadi, a 4-day urban war that saw U.S. Marines ambushed, surrounded, and outgunned, forced to fight for survival, street by street, no air support, no artillery backup, just grit, rifles, and pure determination. It wasn't just a firefight, it was the moment Ramadi, a city that would later become the heart of the insurgency, revealed its true danger. A city that gave birth to the rise of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. A city that some say was the spark for a war within the war. This is the story few have told, until now. If you're into military history, forgotten battles, and the real stories behind headlines, hit that like button and subscribe. We've got many more videos like this one that dive deep into combat stories the world tried to forget. Now, let's go back to 2004 and step into the city that became the first major test of America's fight for Iraq. In the months leading up to April 2004, Ramadi was a powder keg. Located in Iraq's vast and volatile Anbar province, the city was home to nearly 400,000 people, most of them Sunni, many of them bitter. Bitter that their long dominant Ba'ath party had been dismantled. Bitter that American forces were now occupying their streets. Bitter that their future looked uncertain. The U.S.-led coalition's policy of de-Baathification had stripped former officers, civil servants, and government loyalists of their jobs and influence. These weren't just paper pushers. Many were trained military leaders with battlefield experience, tribal authority, and deep connections across the region. When they were pushed out, they didn't disappear. They went underground. What began as scattered resentment turned into organized resistance. Small insurgent cells began to form. Explosive devices started appearing under roads. Attacks on patrols became more frequent. Marines in Ramadi weren't just soldiers. They had to be peacekeepers, diplomats, and detectives all at once, trying to keep a lid on a city that was ready to boil over. Then came the flashpoint. March 31st, 2004. 4 Blackwater contractors were ambushed, murdered, and mutilated in Fallujah. Their bodies were hung from a bridge, sending shockwaves through the U.S. public and triggering a massive military response. As American forces launched the first Battle of Fallujah, insurgents in Ramadi saw their chance. With attention and resources diverted, they moved fast. They cut off highways, ambushed convoys, and began probing U.S. defenses. They weren't just testing the Americans. They were preparing for something bigger. They understood the stakes. Ramadi wasn't just another Iraqi city. It was a logistical hub, a key supply line, and a political symbol. If it fell, it would show the world that America's grip on Western Iraq was slipping. And on April 6th, the fight for Ramadi began. You could feel the tension in the air, like the city knew something was about to happen. It began on the morning of April 6th, 2004. A squad from Gulf Company, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, was patrolling a stretch just south of the main supply route. For weeks, they dealt with sporadic ambushes and roadside bombs, the kind of warfare that kept you on edge but never quite broke you. That morning felt no different, until it did. Insurgents sprung a coordinated ambush, hitting the Marines with small arms fire and RPGs. 3 Marines were killed almost immediately. Others were pinned down and wounded, calling frantically for backup. But there was a problem. Air and artillery support were unavailable, locked into the larger assault unfolding in Fallujah. Only a few quick reaction units were close enough to respond. Gulf Company's 1st platoon was among them. As they pushed toward their trapped brothers, they were ambushed too. Insurgents had scattered across the city, setting up kill zones and sniper positions. It was clear now, this wasn't a random attack. This was a planned offensive designed to hit hard, spread chaos, and overrun American positions. Fighting spread like wildfire through central Ramadi. Near Easy Street, Marines fought block by block. House-to-house combat erupted. Brutal, close, and personal. You didn't see the enemy until he stepped out of a shadow. or fired from a doorway, or appeared suddenly from a rooftop. A doorway, or appeared suddenly from a rooftop. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Echo Company came under heavy fire at a key observation post. The insurgents knew the layout, the weaknesses, the routines. They pressed hard, launching sustained attacks that forced the Marines to call up every available hand. Clerks, radio operators, cooks. Non-combat personnel were given rifles and thrown into the line. One Marine would later say, "It didn't matter what your job was that week. If you could shoot, you were on the wall." For 4 straight days, Ramadi was a battlefield. Marines operated without rest, under constant fire. Streets were taken, then lost, then retaken again. Buildings changed hands several times in one day. Snipers controlled the rooftops, and every alley felt like a trap. The insurgents were clever and coordinated. They used local knowledge, hidden tunnels, and even sympathetic civilians to move around U.S. forces. In some cases, they disappeared into the population before striking again minutes later from another direction. Without tanks or air cover, Marines relied on squad-level tactics and pure determination. They used suppressing fire to move from building to building, kicked in doors, cleared stairwells, and adapted to a style of urban combat more reminiscent of World War II than modern warfare. Some firefights lasted hours, others were over in seconds. Brutal, close, and final. And yet, despite the ambush, despite the numbers, despite the lack of support, the Marines held the line. By April 10th, the tide had turned. Insurgent fighters had been pushed out of most central neighborhoods. The U.S. had regained a fragile hold on the city, but the cost was high. 12 American troops were killed. Over 200 were wounded. More than 250 insurgents were killed in the fighting. It was one of the deadliest engagements of the war up to that point for the U.S. military. There were no parades, no headlines, no primetime coverage. Fallujah still dominated the news cycle. Ramadi barely got a mention. But for the Marines who fought there, Ramadi was hell. And worse, they knew it wasn't over. In the words of one sergeant, "We pushed them back, but we didn't kill the idea. We knew they'd be back." What U.S. forces didn't realize at the time was that this 4-day battle marked the beginning of a much longer fight for control of the city. While the Marines cleared the streets, the insurgency simply went underground, adapting, regrouping, and preparing for a more deadly phase to come. We thought we cleared the city, but really we just kicked a hornet's nest. When the first Battle of Ramadi ended on April 10th, 2004, the U.S. military counted it as a tactical victory. Insurgents had been pushed out of key areas, supply routes were resecured, and the Marines remained standing. But it was a victory without staying power. Just 3 weeks later, on May 1st, 2004, President George W. Bush declared the official end of major combat operations in Iraq. For Ramadi, that declaration couldn't have felt more disconnected from reality. While the smoke cleared, the fight had only just begun. The city had changed, and so had the enemy. Insurgents had seen firsthand how thinly stretched American forces were. They learned U.S. tactics, watched their movements, and began to exploit weaknesses. They started embedding deeper into the urban terrain. Weapons caches were hidden in homes. Fighters moved in and out of civilian crowds. They didn't need to hold territory. They only needed to make the city ungovernable. At the same time, the de-Baathification policy continued to fuel unrest. Former officers and party members, many of them respected figures in the community, had been purged from Iraqi society. With no future in the new government, they began to work in the shadows. They provided tactical guidance, intelligence networks, and financing for a growing insurgency. From 2004 to 2005, Ramadi descended into chaos. Bombings became routine. Patrols were ambushed daily. American and Iraqi forces would clear one block, only to lose it the next week. The city became known as the heart of the Sunni insurgency. And while the Marines held the line during those 4 days in April, the battle for Ramadi had entered a new, more dangerous phase, one where the enemy didn't wear uniforms, didn't hold ground, and didn't play by the old rules. They didn't just want to kill Americans. They wanted to take over. By late 2005, the insurgency in Ramadi had taken a darker turn. What began as a decentralized resistance of former Baathists and angry locals had transformed into something far more organized and far more brutal. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, AQI, had moved in, filling the vacuum left by a crumbling city and a fractured population. Led by the infamous Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, AQI didn't just bring weapons and fighters. They brought ideology, they brought terror, and they brought control. They quickly established Ramadi as a hub of jihadist activity, declaring it the capital of their Islamic State of Iraq, a precursor to what the world would later know as ISIS. Using fear, violence, and propaganda, they turned neighborhoods into fortresses. Civilians were intimidated, tribal leaders were assassinated, and Iraqi police recruits were targeted in deadly suicide bombings. One of the deadliest attacks came in January 2006, when a suicide bomber walked into a police recruitment center in Ramadi and killed 56 Iraqi recruits and 1 U.S. soldier. It sent a chilling message. No one who cooperated with the Americans would be safe. U.S. forces tried to counter the growing threat with patrols and sweeps, but AQI was elusive. As soon as Marines cleared an area, it would be reoccupied by insurgents days later. The enemy had changed. They weren't just trying to resist anymore. They were trying to rule. By 2006, Ramadi wasn't just dangerous, it was collapsing. As the new year dawned in 2006, Ramadi was under siege. Not from the outside, but from within. Insurgent attacks averaged 20 or more per day. U.S. and Iraqi forces were stretched thin, pinned down in isolated outposts and constantly hit by snipers, IEDs, and complex ambushes. Key areas of the city had become no-go zones, even for armored vehicles. The local Iraqi police force had nearly disintegrated. Civilians were afraid to cooperate. Some were sympathetic to the insurgents, others were simply terrified. Every street was contested. Every night brought more explosions. On April 17, 2006, the insurgents struck with one of their most coordinated assaults yet. Observation Post Virginia, a major U.S. position, was hit by a vehicle-borne suicide bomb packed with 1,000 pounds of explosives. The blast was followed by a ground assault of fighters armed with RPGs and rifles. The Marines barely held the line. By mid-year, U.S. intelligence painted a grim picture. Marine Colonel Pete Devlin reported that Ramadi is a lost cause. He warned that there was little the U.S. military could do to reverse the city's political and social collapse. But something was about to change. Ramadi was broken, but not beyond saving. By the summer of 2006, the city was barely holding together. American commanders described Ramadi as the most dangerous place in Iraq, a city where Al-Qaeda operated openly, where U.S. forces were confined to bunkers, and where hope seemed to have all but vanished. The Marines who had fought there in 2004 saw it happening again. Only this time, the insurgents were stronger, more organized, and more brutal. But deep in the chaos, a shift was beginning. A small group of Sunni tribal leaders had started to turn. They were fed up with Al-Qaeda's brutality, its assassinations, its attacks on their people. They didn't want foreign jihadists ruling their towns. They wanted their city back. And just as Ramadi seemed lost, an idea began to take shape. Not just to fight harder, but to fight smarter, to build alliances, to live among the people, and to turn former enemies into partners. In our next video, we'll dive into that story, the Second Battle of Ramadi, a brutal, months-long counteroffensive that would change the war in Iraq and give birth to something no one saw coming, the Anbar awakening. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, we truly appreciate your time and interest. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore our other videos if you enjoy in-depth military history and untold war stories.